And now, The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes on 702.
Let's walk the talk.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by Absa Corporate and Investment Banking, a Pan-African bank that's invested in your story because your story matters. Good evening. Welcome to the program tonight on a day which may be remembered if you live in Joburg, in Gauteng, or you're watching it from Cape Town, in which President Cyril Ramaphosa announced a presidential working group for Joburg to follow the eThekwini model. And just for a moment, imagine what it would be like if Johannesburg worked, frankly, like the richer parts of Cape Town did. Just for a moment. If, the buses were on time, if you didn't have quite such a need for minibus taxis, if there were no potholes, and I can't emphasize this enough, there are other problems in Joburg, but I think nothing is as visible a symptom of the problem. You don't drive past a home and see that it doesn't have water, but you do just see potholes everywhere, in every part of Joburg, and it is just incredible what we've been seeing. And of course, the next question that is going to come along is who is going to be part of this presidential working group on the city of Johannesburg. I say all of this because we keep talking on this program, and we will keep talking on this program about what it will take to grow the economy. And I would suggest that it would take fixing Joburg to an extent to grow the economy. Let me put it in a slightly clearer way. I don't think you can really grow the economy without fixing Joburg. That to me makes sense. It's just too big. It has to be sorted out. And I think the president actually said something similar. The mayor, Dada Marero, said something similar. I do wonder, and I say this with no special information, but I do wonder if Dada Marero's days as mayor of Joburg may in fact be numbered. One or two pieces appearing today suggesting that. And if you consider the track record, if you consider the ANC has a local election to face in a few months or next year, then perhaps actually this might be the time for them to do something, if that is indeed how they're thinking. I can't predict the future. The point, of course, is that if things work, then we'll have economic growth. If they don't, we won't. And I'm reminded of Julian's call to us yesterday on 011-883-0702 and 021-446-0567 about the deeds office. And yes, he's someone who has been around for a long time, but just trying to get things done. The lifts don't work. And so you can't really ask clerks to go up 20 flights of stairs all the time. The problem, of course, is that we see this happening in so many government buildings, in so many places. And this is really the issue. Good to hear from you tonight on that. And I'll be very interested if you know anything more about the deeds office and if, in fact, things have improved or not. We will talk about global capital flows in a moment. But after that, we'll be talking about Royal AM, the football club. And I must just say, the moment that the Royal AM was given a PSL status, it bought it, by the way. That's how you get into the PSL. You buy it. You don't actually have to do anything. You just buy it. There's a certain number of clubs and you buy someone else's status. It's simple as that, as I understand it. We'll get more from an expert in a while. But you kind of knew that when Royal AM went into the PSL, something bad was going to happen because of the history of Sean Mkhize. And sorry to say this, but we all knew about the disputes around SARS and everything else for quite some time. This has been going on for a long while. So in claims it's not surprising that this happened. There are some questions, though. 27 million rand went from Umsunduzi, the council around Pietermaritzburg, to Royal AM. Where did that money go? I'd like to know. The club is now up for sale, and we'll talk about that in a few moments. Good to hear. We'll take calls from Bloemfontein Celtic fans, by the way. And if you're wondering what the link is, it was the status of Bloemfontein Celtic that was bought by Sean Mkhize for Royal AM. That's how they got into the PSL. Look where we are now. Good to hear from you tonight. Voice notes on 072-702-1702. You can, of course, call us too on 021-446-0567 and 011-883-0702.
702. Stephen is on The Money Show.
6 to 8 p.m.
Over the last 3 years or so, I suppose we could say from the beginning of the end of the pandemic, one of the dominant dynamics in global capital was that money was flowing to the United States. Their economy was growing so strongly, their stock market seemed to be roaring ahead most of the time, more than anyone else's. Now, for the first time in a while, we're seeing suggestions that this is going to unwind, that money may now flow away from the US into other markets. The reasons this are happening, on the one side, the pull factors may have changed. There's more stimulus in China. Germany appears to be getting its act together. There's the big infrastructure fund there. But it's really about President Donald Trump and the tariffs and the confusion, the changeable nature, the fact that they're announced, then they're exceptions, then they're announced again, and because no one really knows what is going to happen. And that is leading to suggestions that, in fact, something is about to change. Professor Adrian Saville is Professor of Economics and Finance at Gibbs. Adrian, good evening. How do we begin to assess if this pattern, money flowing to the US, is about to change? And I suppose the first signs would be the stock markets.
Yeah, there's a couple of markets that give you big clues, and I would suggest that currency might even be a forewarning of implications for other capital markets. But certainly you want to keep a very close eye on currency. And for a long time, the US dollar has been on a one-way journey to stronger and stronger. That now is undoing itself. And then the stock market, but perhaps even before the stock market, the bond market, it gives you big clues, because the bond market, if anything, is worried about not just private sector funding, but also public sector funding and other risks that are perhaps easier to gauge and monitor, inflation being the obvious one. So, I think that gives us a healthy trifecta of thinking about signals that come from capital markets.
This morning, I was watching Bloomberg this afternoon, and there was a parade of people talking about tariffs, talking about a possible slowdown, talking about this very issue. Is it definitely happening, or is it still much too soon to say?
No, I smile to myself. You say you can't, in your talking about other issues just before we started speaking, I heard you say that you can't predict the future. I think that you can. And what we can predict is that there will be another surprise announcement, possibly within the next 48 hours. Mondays are always good for Trump announcements. So there's a tremendous amount of uncertainty in the environment at the moment. There's a policy uncertainty index, which is a very useful barometer of helping us sort of gauge the way people are digesting policy news. And at the moment, the policy uncertainty barometer is printing at levels seen around the time of COVID, global financial crisis, and the tech meltdown in Y2K. So we've got very, very elevated anxiety around policy, and when I speak about the policy uncertainty index, specific to the United States.
I'm sort of trying to avoid smiling to myself now because Trump said he wanted a weaker dollar. Well, he's got it.
He's got it. And, here is Trump failing Economics 101 again. So there's, he's got two spectacular sort of policy mistakes going on in his head. The first is he imagines that he can create a strong domestic economy with tariffs. The long history of tariff protection tells us that, generally speaking, it's a lose-lose outcome, that there are seldom winners from tariff protection, and that most likely the people who pay the price in the United States are your ultimate consumers. They will pay the highest price. So, he doesn't understand trade policy 101. And then the other suggestion is that you can buy competitiveness by weakening your currency. Well, if that was the case, then South Africa should be a global champion in exports, because I'm reminded of late global financial crisis when business and COSATU came together. The rand was trading at 7-8 to the dollar, and there was an urging that we should have a weaker currency because that would help South Africa's export competitiveness. Well, here we are at 18, and how's that export competitiveness going? I know it's a single currency example, but I think it helps illustrate the point that competitiveness is about much, much more than pricing. So you might get a small early advantage from a weak dollar, but what you really need is you need competitive infrastructure, you need competitive labor, you need strong labor and product markets that will feed your export competitiveness and help your domestic manufacturers compete against imports. A weak dollar won't be enough.
one of the things now, of course, is that if Trump were to come out tonight or on Monday, as he prefers, and say he's putting the tariff clock back to where it was before he came to power, firstly, no one would believe him. I mean, it's entirely possible he does that. But if there was a way that he could show that certainty, would that change this dynamic? What I'm really asking is this all about tariffs, or are there other factors too?
I think that's a great point. So tariffs is one part of the story. There's much more else going on, including concerns around Europe, defense spending, the implications for commodity prices if Russia-Ukraine goes in a different direction. The saber rattling with China and what that means in terms of tit for tat or retaliatory policies, which very often will not be evident to the naked eye. They'll be going on in closed corridors. And then you made the point in the preamble about the flow which has been going to the United States, one-way traffic, and what we've seen is a very expensive set of capital markets. The bond market's rich, equity markets are rich, and then you've got a strong U.S. currency. All of this might be in the process of unraveling, and I suspect that it's a combination of those things, and in particular, the very stretched valuation coupled with high levels of anxiety around policy.
For a long time, global growth has, to an extent, come from the US. I mean, famously, it's a third bigger than the EU. I think it was 2012. They were roughly the same size. I can't imagine that we can really look to China and Europe to provide growth now. In other words, this has huge implications for the global economy. Speaking against the backdrop of my local Hardy-Dar, Europe, I think, has got enough to surprise. That for a long time, Europe suffering under the binding constraint of Eurosclerosis, perhaps to try and venture a term. This might be the wake-up call that they've needed. When we aggregate, so that would be my first observation. The second is when you aggregate, the various economies that you're talking about, China, India, other large emerging markets that are emerging faster than the world average, that collective basket could actually pick up a lot of the running that the US might drop. Professor Adrian Saville, thank you very much indeed. Really do appreciate it. Regards to the Hardy-Dar. He's Professor of Economics and Finance at Gibbs. That's Adrian Saville, not the Hardy-Dar.
The Money Show on 702.
Monday to Friday, 6 to 8 p.m.
Well, confirmation this week from the curator of the former PSL club Royal AM. It's now up for sale. If you're going to buy it, you're buying its debt too. Royal AM was formed by Sean Mkhize. She owes SARS a huge amount of money. It was confiscated by SARS as a result of that. And if you're wondering how Royal AM became a PSL club in the first place, they bought that status from Bloemfontein Celtic, which then ceased to exist. Nkobile Ndlovu is a sports business expert. Nkobile, good evening to you. If you put in a bid for Royal AM, if you win, what are you actually buying?
You're buying, Stephen, a poison chalice. You're buying a whole heap of debt and sleepless nights.
I mean, I don't even know how much debt it has, but it's got all sorts of problems. I mean, it's not, I think, still serving out a ban from FIFA on transfers, for example, because of the way it's conducted itself.
Correct. So the list of trouble. First is the transfer ban, owing to the fact that they owe a player by the name of Samir Nokovic. They've owed him for quite some time a lot of money. It initially started off as about 12 million rand, which was the value of his contract because they terminated his contract prematurely, and now it's accumulated tax and so on and so on. So it's now at 15 million rand. So they owe him 15 million, which is the reason for the transfer ban. They also had other players who they owed transfer, fees and outstanding monies, but be that as it may, those players are still somewhat with the club. On top of that, they have this issue around their neck around the sponsorship of the club by the Msunduzi municipality, who is, as we know, is essentially broke, but they were sponsoring the club to the tune of about 27 million rand. That sponsorship is being taken to court by the DA, and from my understanding, it's not going to be there anymore. They've also, on top of that, got the curator, who is essentially frozen the assets of the club, and they cannot sell or buy players. Essentially, they cannot sneeze without permission. The guards of all of their premises, because there's about 22 respondents, beyond Shaun Mkhize and her son. There's a total of 22 respondents. And and they're also facing relegation, by the way, because they're at the bottom of the league due to not having played any matches since the end of November, beginning of December.
Sure. And I mean, wasn't there a club centre forward who was also the chairman, I think, maybe at some point?
The son, yes.
Yes,
he was the midfielder.
Yes.
He was the chairman, yes. Essentially, she bought the club for him because the name of the club is Royal AM. AM are his initials, Andile Mpisane. So there you go.
What I could never understand, Ngobile, and we've just had a conversation about global capital and predicting the future, but when Shaun Mkhize came into the PSL, we kind of knew that her business affairs were messy, let me use that word, and that this was always possible, wasn't it? I mean, we always knew this. I mean, so much of this was predictable.
Yeah, I highlighted this a couple of weeks ago. If the PSL had a law in place with regards to fraud convictions of owners, for example, she could never have owned a club. She was found guilty of fraud in 2005. She had a very famous SARS case of over 200 million rand in 2012. She's had many run-ins with the law, and especially SARS with regards to monies owed. And I mean, yeah, you could see it coming from a mile away that this is not a person who is who's got a clean image in general. It manifested itself within the first year of her being the owner of that club, where, if you remember, there was a famous incident where she handed out money, her and her son handed out money to players on the pitch, and there was a whole dancing fiasco. It was a big embarrassment to the PSL because, I mean, it didn't look good at all. So, yeah, I think you could have foreseen this coming, and it wasn't a surprise at all that, things ended up the way that they have.
The way that the PSL has managed all of this, and I realize this is in some ways an impossible position for them, but we could all see that they weren't playing the games, we weren't playing the matches, and nobody said anything. And the complication from that, of course, is that the way that the league works, or it far better than I do, Nkobile, is that your points are based on who you've beaten. And so, if you play a game and you win and you get points for it, but now that club is no longer part of the league, you may no longer have those points and your position could be affected. So, I mean, the complications, the permutations are endless. No one would say anything for a long time, but goes back to how you can sort of buy yourself into the PSL. I mean, I'm not sure if I had a lot of money, what would stop me getting two producers, technical producer, a couple of friends for the show, calling ourselves Money Show, I don't know, SG or something, paying a few million rand to buy the premiership status of someone else, and off we go.
Yeah, technically, if you had a team right now in the second division, which is the NFD, and you called it whatever it is, you had your group of players, you had a youth department or a youth development team, etc., which essentially are the requirements for you to have a license. You could approach any owner of a PSL team, be it Mamelodi Sundowns or whomever it is, come to a figure that you both agree on, and approach the league and say, we've agreed a sale. And you, essentially, with your team in the NFD, would then be able to take the position of whichever team it is in the PSL and swap statuses. Essentially, you would be able to buy their status or their slot within the league. It's perfectly legal in the PSL because teams are essentially owned by private individuals. They are private businesses, and yeah, you could essentially buy a private business's position within the league and swap positions. It's a very peculiar thing. I don't think it happens anywhere else. And in my opinion, and I've been quite vocal about this, I think it's one of the biggest issues that we have in South African football, because what it serves to do is that it destroys legacy. If you look at the teams that were in place at the beginning of the PSL in 96, I think at my last count, only about 6 of them still survive as actual clubs. The rest of them have been sold off and statuses and names changed, etc., etc. Just ask anyone who supported Britvic Brits or Bloemfontein Celtic. Those teams don't exist anymore.
Who are the 2 men who run our football? Never mind, Ngulbile, it's a story for another time. Thank you very much indeed, Ngulbile Ndlovu, the sports business expert.
The Money Show.
The markets.
Patrick Matidi is head of multi-asset strategies at Aluwani Capital Partners. Patrick, good evening. Let's start in the US. A US jobs report out, not creating as many jobs as expected. And this feeds into a much bigger conversation we've been having tonight about expectations for the US economy.
Yeah, good evening, Stephen, and thanks for having me. So the non-farm payrolls numbers came out at about 150,000 jobs created in Feb against an expectation of 160,000. And I think, interestingly, the unemployment rate started ticking up, now sitting at about 4.1%. So there's a lot of reading through into those numbers into the rest of the economy where, market commentators are starting to question the impact of tariffs on employment prospects, but also on the overall state of the economy in the U.S.
I mean, we were talking a moment ago about capital flows, and I think it's really largely about tariffs, not only about tariffs, but Trump is such a big factor in all of this.
Absolutely. One other gauge of sentiment, also called the fear factor, index in the U.S., the VIX, at about a month ago, it was sitting at about 16 points, currently sitting at about 25, and it's likely to double. At 25, sort of not too far off from where it was just around COVID. So you can see that, sentiment in the U.S., sentiment from investors, in terms of outlook on the U.S. has shifted. And it has shifted, unfortunately, to the negative. And also, if you look at the monthly flows in terms of the different asset classes in the U.S., we've seen record inflows into money markets away from equities. So again, you can see that there is therefore this sheer factor at play where people are de-risking their portfolios and hoarding cash, so to speak.
We've seen a very strong week for platinum shares on the JSE, and rhodium prices are very high, I notice. What seems to be driving that?
Yeah, I think it's a bit tricky to pin it down, but I think 2 key stories that broke out over the last couple of days maybe behind that surge in price. One is the reprieve that the automobile manufacturers got in terms of converting into EVs. That deadline has been shifted by another 5 years. So that means therefore that in the interim, demand for PGMs that go into catalytic into cars or internal combustion engine cars, that demand suddenly comes back. And then the second one is the whole Eurozone focus in terms of building its own defense arsenal, given what's happening from a geopolitical point of view, especially driven by Trump. There, the expectation is a lot of that infrastructure build, some of it will go into military vehicles. And as you know, those that tend to be, they tend to use sort of fossil fuels, from an energy consumption point of view. And therefore, PGMs also do play a role in terms of that profile. And then
Exxaro today, very strong decline. Obviously, their profits could be down by up to 44%, and they lost their CEO recently.
Yeah, so the numbers a little bit surprising. They announced they're guiding to earnings being down between 30 and 44% when they report. I think they're reporting in the next couple of days. And in terms of unpacking, that decline, a lot of it seems to be on the cost line where they seem to have lost a bit of control in terms of costs, which is a little bit surprising. So we have seen a lot of the miners, the challenge tends to be on the top line where commodity prices have been depressed. In some instances, the guys have been struggling with volumes. But in the case of Exxaro, notably, it's more the cost line, which typically should be well within their control. But we'll have to see when they finally report as to what was the main drivers. And also, you are right. They have just come out of a CEO drama where they lost their CEO, after an internal investigation, which was never really completed. So yeah, there seems to be a little bit of cause for concern there. But let's wait for the actual results and see how management explains themselves, especially when it comes to the drivers of that earnings decline.
Patrick Matidi, thank you very much indeed. Head of Multi-Asset Strategies at Alawani Capital Partners. Just after 6:30.
The Money Show.
The Friday File.
The Friday File.
17 minutes now to 7 the time. Well, many years ago, in the mid-1990s, I was a student at Rhodes University. Things were a bit different then. There was a little bit more hair on my head for a start. There was no internet really, certainly no Wikipedia. And if you wanted to conduct research on a place, you either had to find books, literally read about it, really, or you had to go there yourself. So one evening, after having one or two little drinks with some salt and some lemon, you know those little drinks in those little glasses that maybe you had when you were young with salt and lemon, I was a little surprised when the person I was doing this with told me that his father was a farmer. I wasn't surprised at that. I was surprised that his father was now growing the active ingredient of tequila. He told me that this was because his family farm was near Cradock in the Eastern Cape, and he had worked out, the son, not the farmer, that it had the same climate as the areas in Mexico where they grow tequila. So I was interested to learn this afternoon that, in fact, my clever friend and his clever father are not the only one. And in fact, there's a thriving South African company doing the same thing, also from a farm around Cradock. Sarah Kennan is the founder of Leonista. They sell a product that, for legal reasons, they have to call agave because only tequila made in Mexico can be sold as tequila. Sarah, it's wonderful to talk to you. Good evening to you. There are many different things you can grow in Cradock. Sheep do quite well. Why agave?
Thanks for having me, Stephen. Agave, the climate, it's perfect. The agave thrives on hot weather, desert climates, and thrives on neglect.
It could do well in Joburg. It's basically a cactus, right? That's what it is. It's basically a cactus.
It looks like a cactus, but it's actually closer to a lily family. Yeah.
Okay. Does it take a long time from planting it to sort of harvesting? How does it grow? What's the sort of growth cycle?
So it takes about 12 years to grow, depending on the agave. Some agave take a little bit less, maybe 8 years, and some agave take up to 30 years. So it all depends on the agave. It all depends on the climate, how much water they have. But it's an incredible plant because, as I said, it thrives on neglect. It's almost like a weed. It just grows on its own, grows in desert-like climates where nothing else really grows. So it's just a wonderful plant and has many uses.
How do you harvest it? And obviously they're thorns, but how does that process work?
So the harvesting process goes that it looks like a big hand essentially, with lots of little fingers, and you want to cut off all the fingers or all the leaves essentially, and reveal the heart of the agave. So that's called the piña. And in the heart of that agave is all the starch energy that you want to convert from sort of a hard energy into liquid energy. And the way that we do that to make tequila, mezcal, agave spirit is you put that in an oven. And once it's put in the oven, it's baked and it gets caramelized. All the beautiful flavors come through. You squash it, ferment it, distill it, and then comes the blanco and then aged to become reposado and honey reposado.
Sure. Okay. Does that mean that you kill the plant each time, or can you sort of have multiple harvests from the same plant?
So the plant has one life in that it grows and grows and grows until it's mature enough to grow a pole, essentially. So I don't know if you've seen the agave growing. You see them in Joburg, you see them in the Karoo. Sometimes they have one pole growing, and it's kind of like a Christmas. Some people use it as a Christmas tree. That would be the end of its life. So it would die anyway. So what we're doing is harvesting it just before it grows that pole, and using all the energy it would have used to grow that pole to make the tequila. So it's 12 years worth of energy we're converting from hard energy into liquid energy. So that's why tequila gives you such a nice buzz.
That's a good way to put it. So when you put it in the oven, is that quite a long process? Is it a very high temperature, or is it quite a quick thing?
It's a little bit like slow cooking meat. So you want to soften it and caramelize it. So it's a 2-day process at a semi-high temperature. And then, there's tequila and there's mezcal. I don't know if you've ever heard of the term mezcal, but basically tequila, when you bake it, you use a non-wood-fired oven, so no smoke. Whereas mezcal, you use a wood-fired oven. So when you taste mezcals and when you taste Leonista, you're going to taste a smoky flavor because you use a wood-fired oven. So the flavor profile is affected by that baking process.
Okay, so once you've done that, you still have to distill it and add ththings to it. You don't want to add too much, but what are you adding things to it? I know some tequilas do.
So you want to add as little as possible. You just want to enhance whatever already is. So the Blanco, which is the closest to a mezcal that we have, is clear. It looks like a gin, looks like a vodka. So nothing's added. It's just, it's distilled. And then we add water, because obviously when it comes out the still, it comes out at a very high proof, 80%. So that you wouldn't want to drink that. That would get you very drunk very quickly. So you add beautiful water and bring it down to 43 or 40%. We bring it down to 40%. And that's the Blanco. And then the way that you get the color is that you put it in barrels. So we use American oak barrels for our reposados. Reposado means rested. They're old brandy barrels, so you get the sweetness of the brandy. And that's where you get that beautiful golden color and the flavors of the whiskey flavors, where there's, caramel flavors and the wooded flavors. And then we do have a honey reposado. So we do add wild Fynbos honey. We're the only ones in the world doing it. And that's just kind of a fun, unique product that we created, which tastes incredible and gives you a really nice buzz.
So you produce a sipping agave or sipping tequila. Is that a very different process to the ones that I might have had perhaps at university?
Yes. Well, the main thing is that we don't cut it with any cane spirit or low quality spirit to make it cheaper. So essentially the low quality cheaper tequilas that might have been on the market when you were younger or are still on the market but are very cheap are called mixtos. So you want to avoid those because those are the ones that give you the really bad hangover in the morning and the gag reflex when you take a shot of them. Good quality tequila and mezcals are 100% agave. So that means they're 100% made from the plant. They're not cut with anything. So yeah, they just taste amazing. They're as easy drinking as a whiskey. And again, they give you a nice buzz with minimal hangover.
So it's a sipping tequila. And how do you sip it? Which is really a way of asking, is there a particular glass? Do you have ice? Do you not? Is it up to you? Can I use a whiskey glass or is that not done?
I would treat it exactly like a whiskey. So I would say, 1 or 2 blocks of ice. South Africa's got a very hot climate, so I love to make cocktails with it. Tequila is super playful and fun to make cocktails with. But, one of the main things about tequila is, it's a healthier alternative if you are going to drink. So the best cocktails you can make are always with fresh ingredients, not too much sugar, fresh lime juice to make a classic margarita, fresh grapefruit juice to make a paloma. Those are the amazing longer drinks that you can make and are really delicious and a healthier alternative.
So you've been making it for quite some time. The alcohol content, which is very high, has that only come about when you do the cooking, or is it already present in the sort of heart of the plant?
So you can make alcohol with anything that has sugar. So you can make alcohol from pineapples, from grapes, anything that has sugar. And then when you distill from the mash that's fermented into a spirit, it always comes out at a very high proof. So it comes out at 80, 70%. And then you will always want to bring that down with a pure, beautiful water. So in Scotland, they use, beautiful spring water, and that affects how the whiskey tastes. And that's very important to the process. So that's very important to us as well. We add water to bring it down to 40%. So that's pretty standard when it comes to spirits. So whiskeys are all pretty much at 40%, gins as well, between the range of 40 to 43. Actually, classic mezcals from Mexico are usually in the higher range, 45 to 50. But we like a spirit that you can drink more of and not get affected, not get drunk too quickly. So we like it at 40%, nice and smooth.
Building this brand, Leonista, I mean, there's a lot of competition in international markets for this kind of thing. What's that process been like? Because there are lots of things. There's packaging, there's the marketing, there's the fact that you're from the Karoo, all of those things. I mean, there's a huge amount of work that goes into it.
Yeah, it's a massive challenge to educate the market that there is a spirit that is as good as what comes out of Mexico. We can't call it tequila, we can't call it mezcal because it's not made there, but it's as good. It's made with as much love and craftsmanship. And it's actually unique in that way because it's made from agave that grows in the Karoo, and nobody else in the world can repeat what we create in terms of its terroir, but in terms of its flavor. So I guess it's one of the biggest challenges, the fact that it's made from South Africa, from African agave, but it's also one of its biggest unique elements, because the unique flavor we get is because of the African elements and the African agave that it's made from.
And there's a lot of competition, right? I mean, when people say you make this and you're from the Karoo, and it comes from the Karoo, are people surprised?
Very surprised. First of all, most people think it's made from a cactus, like you do, and then so they're surprised to hear that it's made from the agave, which usually grows in their backyard. So they're like, oh, I've got a couple of those growing, and yeah, I guess that they're usually impressed and surprised and excited about the fact that there is now we're pioneering, I guess, an agave spirit or African tequila mezcal category. And they want to try it and they want it to do well and they want to get involved and experience it in a positive way, which is obviously amazing. And that's our job, is to help people experience tequila in a more positive way as opposed to just shooters from plastic glass and then a hangover in the morning. That's not, when I went to Mexico, that's not how I experienced tequila. That's what made me inspired, is all the tequilas I tasted there were just incredible flavors. You could sip them neat or on some ice and minimal hangover in the morning. And it was just such an amazing culture that inspired me. So I wanted to bring that to South Africa, but using African agave.
Sarah, thank you very much indeed. Sarah Kennan, founder and owner at Leonista. A good person to be with if you get lost in Craddock.
The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes.
All right, time for the Friday Biz Blitz. You know how this works. 011 883 0702 021 446 0567. If you get the first one right, we move on to the next question. If you get it wrong, we move on to the next caller. First question in the Friday Biz Blitz this evening. The Maloti mountain range is found in which kingdom, founded by King Moshoeshoe in 1820. The Maloti mountain range is found in which kingdom, which was created by King Moshoeshoe in 1820? This is not a hard question.
The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes, live on 92.7 and 106 FM. Streaming on the Prime Media Plus app
and DSTV channel 856.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by Absa Corporate and Investment Banking, a Pan-African bank that's invested in your story because your story matters. First question on the Friday Biz Blitz. The Maloti mountain range is found in which kingdom, founded by King Moshoeshoe in 1820? Let's go to Roy. You're in the Eastern Cape tonight. Roy, hi. What's your answer?
KZN, KwaZulu-Natal.
Roy, I'm sorry, it's not KZN. Tsapang in Mabopani. Hi, Tsapang.
Hi, Roy. It's from the mountain kingdom of Lesotho that no American has heard of.
Tsapang, yes. Well, by no American, you mean Donald Trump. He said no one had never heard of Lesotho. Well, of course, we have, and we wish we hadn't, never mind. But yeah, Tsapang, you're right. Okay, next question on the Friday Biz Blitz. Mary Vilakazi is the CEO of which company that controls Ashburton, RMB, and FNB?
Can you just repeat that?
Sure. Mary Vilakazi is the CEO of which company? It controls Ashburton, RMB, and FNB.
That's the First Rand Group.
It is. Tsapang, yes, it is the First Rand Group, and she's one of the CEOs we spoke to this week with their results. In retail, the brand Absolute Pets, their pet food, Absolute Pets is controlled by which high-end food and clothing retailer?
Which high-end food and clothing retail? I'm just going to take a guess and say TFG.
No, Tsapang.
I think I just guessed it now.
Come on, it's not hard. I'll give you one more guess. Which high-end food and clothing retailer owns Absolute Pets?
Is it Woolies?
Yeah, of course it's Woolies. Tsapang. Okay. Last question for you, because we're going to be out of time. Professor John Lamola is the CEO of which state-owned entity?
I think I'm going to make a clean sweep here. It's the South African Airways.
You've made a clean sweep, Tsapang. Congratulations indeed from Mabopane. It is SAA, and Professor Lamola was our shapeshifter this week. That, by the way, is still available. You'll hear more from Best Bits in a moment because we'll replay some of that. Tsapang and Mabopane, you are the winner of the Friday Biz Blitz. Thank you very much indeed for playing. Congratulations at 7 o'clock.